This is the fourth and final video on what would Jesus do under unjust conditions affecting whole nations in our world today, if you accept, that is, that there is a millennial reign of Jesus Christ, because that may well be what he actually does when he is ruling with that rod of iron referred to in the Bible. Hello, I'm Michael Saxon, your policy Christian. In fact, as far as I'm aware, I'm the only Christian speaking in terms of actual policy and relating it to the Bible and what can be done to both save Western civilization, restore Western civilization, and also, of course, rebuild the Western church, which, of course, as a Christian is the most important thing. So we've been working over the last few videos through an if-then table. If elites are perpetrating the sort of injustices and evil contained in the table against the West, then we presume Jesus, when reigning on earth, would redeem the situation by responding in ways that would eliminate elite power and privilege, using both the 5 core principles and the 12 reforms in the Next Generation Church evangelism strategy. So if you're familiar with the Policy Christian channel, you will know I'm advocating a Christian response to conditions in the Western world today where two malignant forces, fascist liberalism and feudal corporatism, what I call the two giants, have been championing Satan's schemes to kill, steal and destroy over at least the last 40 years. And he's been doing a good job with their help. They've been so effective, many are now predicting some form of collapse of the Western society. And in fact, President Trump's latest strategy document is referring to civilizational erasure. The right Christian response, consistent with Jesus' 2 great commands, is to hate the evil perpetrated by these two giants, Proverbs 8:13, by controlling them, or confronting them rather, at the local church level by exposing communities to the 5 core Christian worldview principles upon which the West was founded and built, and 12 transformational reforms that would restore the 5 core principles to their rightful place and save the West and rebuild and restore the Western church at the same time. A church that has been self-isolating itself in the wilderness of irrelevance for the last 40 years. I should know, I've been there right through that period. By taking the 5 principles and 12 reforms back into the public square, the church will be prophetically loving its neighbour by telling communities what is wrong and how it can be put right. We do this not in any triumphalist sense, but because it will re-establish the church as relevant to people's lives and make the prosecution of the Great Commission, the evangelistic arm of the church, easier and more ubiquitous. Now, rather than going through the remaining 3 scenarios left on our if-then table, as we've done over the last 3 videos, I will sum things up by going through these remaining scenarios. The whole purpose of this exercise is simply to make a point that any Western church can love its neighbour and evangelize its local people to rebuild the church using the reforms and the 5 core principles. It can act in the just and righteous character of Christ by engaging in what I call Christian politics, which, as you can imagine, or I hope you can imagine, has got nothing at all to do with secular politics. It is done for soul saving and loving our neighbour, not power, control, and atheistic ideological manipulation. If many churches were to accept this vision and strategy, whole nations would be transformed and restored. So let's put my glasses on. Let's go back to the table, which I'll put up as an overhead now for you to look at. And we've been through the first 3 scenarios in previous videos, and we're now down to the last 3, which I'll just go through quickly now. The first is to do with usury, a term from the Bible, which is concerned with interest-bearing debt. It's endemic so we get to, first of all, we better follow the table. We're dealing with the if situation. If usury is endemic, allowing a few institutions to amass personal and financial power over the people who are by design mired in debt, then what would Jesus do? Well, the chances are he would outlaw the practice of usury in banking and initiate a loan-making system that does not link debt with interest. There's also other issues around that could be implemented, like a different money system based on precious metals, but we won't go into that here. And the major reforms there that would help enable this to happen would be reforms 6, 9, 10, and 12, and I'll bring the reforms up again shortly. And then the next one is that ordinary people are treated as serfs. This has got to do with the resurgent feudalism that the corporate and fascist liberals have been trying to bring in. In other words, we're just mere workers and consumers with no effective power as citizens over the most important things in their lives. We're virtual slaves. And what would Jesus do? Well, then he would enable people to work closely together in their workplaces and communities to create high levels of trust, cooperation, and confidence, empowering people over their lives, over their local communities, and over their local governments. And they are men, therefore, free to achieve their made in God's image potential, which you'll recall if you've seen earlier videos is the first of my 5 core Christian principles, and definitely the most important for reasons I've explained elsewhere. And reforms 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 11, and 12 would enable this to happen. And then the last one is that perverse attitudes to morality and individual human potential are ruining lives and robbing people of their ability to make the most of life as created beings, again, made in God's image. Then Jesus would ensure strong families, moral values, education and community administration, promote self-reliance, good individual decision-making, and opportunities to make the most of each individual's skills and abilities, which goes back to the made in God's image principles. And reforms 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7 would cover that whole area. So I'll put up the video now, the overlay now of the 12 reforms, just to remind you of what they are. We won't be going back to the 5 principles, but these reforms are all designed to restore those principles to the center stage in Western society. So here they are. They are to introduce direct democracy, or the Swiss system of binding citizens-initiated referenda, representative reform, which is about ending the anti-democratic practices of the liberal political class, maximize an individual's opportunities, that goes back to the image of God principle, end income tax, reduce government size to less than 20% of GDP, it's at enormous levels at the moment, empower local communities, cultural preservation, and there's a large area there under that, advance justice, interest-free credit, in other words, get rid of the usury system we were just talking about, end gross wealth inequalities, introduce workplace democracy, which is the similar SEMCO model that we go into elsewhere, and re-establish true capitalism. So, if we do all those things, or if we could implement all those things, we would bring down the 2 giants doing everything God hates. And I put up this next overlay, which makes the point that 8 of the reforms would bring down the liberal left, in other words, the fascist liberals, and by submitting them again to the West's Judeo-Christian values, those 5 core principles. And then the remaining 4 of the 12 would hobble or bring down corporatism to its knees and re-establish true, resurgent, free enterprise capitalism, not the crony capitalism and rentier type capitalism, which I explained in a previous video, that we have at present, a false form of capitalism. So we will now move on past these scenarios from the What Would Jesus Do table to go into the 12 reforms in more detail and then link them back to the 5 core principles as we move along through the videos to make it clear that the next generation church evangelism strategy is groundbreaking. It would change the whole dynamic for the church in the West. And as always, through these videos, I will be reminding you that the whole purpose of the strategy, the NGCES, is the Great Commands, to bring the church back to concentrate on the Great Commission to love our neighbor, to evangelize and make disciples, and the Great Command to love our neighbor as we love ourselves, and more importantly, as we love God. And that's a high bar set by Jesus in relation to loving our neighbor. That we do so by focusing on the doctrine of evil, works and rewards, and the other 3 doctrines that really motivate a church to return to the 2 great commands. And we take the lead by going out into the community with a 4-stage evangelism strategy that I've spoke of before, and we rebuild a strong and influential church relevant to our local, to society, making evangelism in the process far easier, using the easy transitions through the 12 reforms and 5 core Christian worldview principles back to the gospel. So that's so stay tuned. Remember to subscribe and like these videos so that we can get somewhere with them. And I'll sign off now. I'm Michael Saxon, your Policy Christian, and I'll see you again soon.